Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video. In this one, we are going to be covering all of the ranged DPS moving into Dragonflight, the next expansion, and talking about their competitive viability, mostly in regards to the new ranked solo queue PvP mode that I know a lot of you, including myself, are very excited to check out. This is using a huge expanse of knowledge from my own experiences in the Dragonflight beta, as well as observing other players and their experiences on and against these specializations, what types of strengths and weaknesses that you're going to be expecting for them moving forward competitively. So if you want to stay up to date with all those changes, because this list is likely subject to change, make sure you hit the subscribe button, because I will be updating them constantly. You will always be in the know and the now and ahead of everybody else as a result. So let's get started. Affliction Warlock. Now this is a specialization that is really powerful at the moment in Dragonflight. It does tremendous damage, if not the highest damage output of any class in the game. However, their Dark Pact is getting targeted for a nerf. I think it went through on the recent beta test that we did over the weekend, and Affliction was still a powerhouse. Now, this is a specialization that can be lobby dependent, so if you don't understand how ranked solo queue is going to work, you're going to join a game with 5 other players. It could be 2 healers, 4 DPS, might be 1 tank and 3 DPS, that type of shenanigans. If you get a lobby like that has a lot of melee attackers, demon hunters, death knights, and warriors, and you're the only warlock in there and the only caster, you might not have too great of a time in a lobby like that unless you're one of the most phenomenal warlock players ever. But pretty much every other scenario, like, you are going to crack skulls. And honestly, there's a lot of other ranged DPS that get put in that melee scenario, and they're not doing too hot either. You're probably the best of all of them. So even despite all of the nerfs, I do think that Affliction is likely to be an S tier specialization. It can be maybe I'll take back that thought. I do think that this specialization, especially when mastered, is going to do tremendous damage. I got a video talking about should you main this specialization after playing it myself. It's a really good time once you've got it kind of like all figured out, but it's definitely not a new player friendly spec, but its competitive viability and chances of climbing, I think, are definitely up there in the S tier. Balanced Druid, this is a spec that I know sometimes I think it's amazing, sometimes I don't. At the moment, it's basically got one build. It's focused around Starfall, stacking it up, keeping dots on multiple targets, and trying to blast people that way with AoE damage, which can work if you stay alive, mostly because in the ranked solo queue mode, dampening stacks up very fast, and this type of AoE damage actually does start to pick up some pace. Defensively, you're made of glass. They've nerfed a lot of your defense, a lot of your recoverability and CC, with Incap and Bash being in the same talent choice and fast clones being nerfed. It's really tough to survive on this specialization and live to that point where your damage is going to become the most impactful. So for me, I think it's probably middle of the pack, if not maybe even below average. I might even move it by the end of the video at the moment, but I'm definitely just putting it in the middle here. I think if you're really good at it, that its damage output, and you're really good at surviving, you can make it work, but it's not going to be as easy as other specializations. Generally speaking, in solo queue, being a ranged DPS, I think is going to be a bit of a rough ride. Arcane Mage. This is pretty much the only spec of Mage that I've seen Mage is not outright like complaining all the day about, basically. For Dragonflight, did just recently get a couple of damage buffs as well. And I think Arcane is really enabled in this expansion because you have so many schools of magic. You're going to have Ring of Fire now. You can maybe even potentially get Ice Wall. You have other spells to cast when you get interrupted on Arcane, which was the main thing that held it back. And the way that it's been rekitted in terms of doing DPS is that it's really strong. So for me, I think that this is an A tier specialization, likely the best of all of the mage specs at the moment, and maybe even upon release at this point. Really good pick, solid pick. Wouldn't say that it's completely over the top though, into the S tier with like the Demon Hunters on my melee list, which I'll have linked at the end of this one if you haven't seen that, but definitely a strong caster at the moment. Beast Mastery Hunter. This is a spec that's similar to Boomkin, does a lot of damage, but on a single target, and defensively is kind of like in shambles comparatively to the S tier specializations, right? You've got enough damage that you can win games, but staying alive to get that damage out is going to be rough. Also, it can be difficult playing a ranged DPS that revolves around crowd control and a healer that can be broken by damage, because you know, a lot of your teammates are not gonna, they're not gonna know that you want to trap the healer. They're gonna be breaking your traps, and then you're like, oh, you broke my trap and I'm dead because I'm really fragile. So while doing damage on it feels really good, it's that same zug feeling of Shadowlands. It's probably still in the same position as we saw from the solo queue tournament that we had, where defensively, like, you're in shambles. So for me, it's probably mid tier at the moment, maybe ahead of Boomkin, because I think single target is a bit more valuable at the moment in terms of like relevant damage to ending the game, but survivability is dramatically lower than the S tier, the A tier specializations, which is holding it back. Demonology, this is very easy. This is probably maybe not the best, actually. There's some to consider, but Demonology still has the Mortal Strike on the pet, summons in tremendous amounts of demons, has incredible survivability, has so much crowd control, which is the main thing for it comparatively to other ranged casters, is that it can stun a target, coil a target, fear a target, get control of the whole team, and play for a kill by itself. That makes it so amazing in a solo queue environment. You can keep that pressure maintained because of the Mortal Strike, and due to its survivability, due to its output at the moment, like, this is a monster spec. Demonology is a monster. I would argue it's pretty tough to not argue that's the best, but we'll talk about some other specs here in the near future. Destruction, you're still kind of stationary. You can pump out damage. It's not as easy as Affliction. I think that you can get shut down more than Demonology, and to be able to control the game like Demonology, you're going to be more limited. You're about as tanky. The only thing is that, like, for Affliction at least, your Drain Life is somewhat in your rotation and keeping you alive at the same time, whereas Destruction has to go out of its way a little bit more. So you're definitely not as powerful defensively in my mind compared to these other specializations. I wouldn't say that it's S tier. Am I debating whether or not it's A tier is really what I'm doing right now. I'm kind of wanting to put it in like a high B, somewhat close to an A, just because of how much damage you can get out of it. I do think that it's an unexplored spec as far as the beta is concerned, for trying different builds and things to make it work. So it's definitely looking a lot brighter, I would say, than, you know, Shadowlands towards the end of Shadowlands has been for Destruction Warlock, but it's not guaranteed or locked in. It still has some of the similar weaknesses that it had prior that have not been either addressed, or the strengths have not been brought down of the other specs that are currently better. So probably safer than Sorry to be putting it closer to the middle, but definitely upper middle. Fire Mage, I feel like this is pretty easy. Fire Mage has been ruling World of Warcraft PvP for I don't even know how long, but based on the track record in the tournament, where every rank 1 BlizzCon, multi-BlizzCon champion Fire Mage went like 0-20 in the solo queue tournament, and seeing Fire Mage in solo queue, especially comparatively to Arcane, let alone every other specialization in the game, is that Fire maybe is debatably the worst spec in the game. Maybe Arms is worse. Arms or Sub maybe is worse. Can't believe I'm saying Arms, Sub, or Fire are the worst specs, thinking about like the history of the game for a while. Like, Fire is definitely a bit yikes at the moment. In terms of the way that its damage profile is, it's definitely feeling the burn of all of the changes that Arcane got in terms of competing with it, and viability, survivability as well. And its damage output still kind of pigeonholed into Combustion. I haven't really seen any builds outside of that. I really hoped that they had shifted Fire into being a damage over time class, as it had been in Wrath of the Lich King or Cataclysm. I don't think that build has been hit on the mark. It's just a much weaker version of the Shadowlands Mage that existed, because Dragon's Breath doesn't last as long. Shifting power is really out of the way to get. It's not as strong as it was. There's a lot of things that got nerfed about it moving forward without having anything really exchanged. So definitely a spec to possibly avoid. Frost Mage, this one was similar to Fire. I was going to put it onto the D tier, but recently I've seen some Glacial Spike builds starting to pop up. The main problem with Frost is if you get a caster heavy lobby like Affliction Warlocks and things like that, you're going to probably have a tough time, even in melee lobbies with Demon Hunters and Death Knights. You got to kind of like post up and cast, which is going to be really dangerous with a lot of the best classes in the game. So even with the Glacial Spike build, like, you can make it work, but you don't have the same type of lockdown. You're not like a Demonology Warlock. The damage isn't going to be as instant or immediately ready. So I feel like it's probably held back. It's kind of like either at the bottom of B or C. Like, you could probably make it work, but you'd be a real hipster. This is maybe giving it more credit than is due just because I haven't seen the full potential of these new builds that are coming out for it. So, bottom of the B, somewhere close to there. Marksmanship Hunter, very similar to Frost, kind of the stationary burst damage. Specialization, it doesn't really feel as spiky as it had been throughout certain points of Shadowlands, if anybody remembers those points for Marksman. There's nothing about it that really stands out to me, aside from the Sentinel Owl, which is basically the Kyrian arrow, the resonating arrow, but it lets your teammates also see through the pillar. The problem is that coordinating that in ranked solo queue, like, number one, you're not really great with casters. If you get a lobby where you got a caster on your team, you're probably already not too hot of a spot, so that synergy there might not be that great anyways. Same problem as BM, but your damage is harder to get off. I want to say it's worse than BM or very close. Is it a C tier specialization? This is honestly, out of all the specs, MM Hunter is the hardest one to rank. I'm really trying to, because I have not seen any types of like astronomical one shots that I would then maybe give it a higher ranking. And its survivability is worse than almost all of the classes in the game. So maybe it is fair. This is one that I might come to regret, and when we update the list, if there's any changes in the future, likely to shift. So do note that this is like a high risk spec. Maybe it's insane, but right now, based on what I've seen, I feel safer putting it lower, especially considering how hunters have performed in solo queue in the past. There's not much change for MM moving forward, and there's so many things that are so much stronger right now. Evoker DPS Devastation. Now this one's the hot one. This is a hot topic. How is Devastation Evoker going? Honestly, I think that if they nerf the Fire Breath at the moment, which is like a 200k hit that you can do instantly with Tip the Scales, you got big advantages with Hover, making you immune to slows, being able to kite away with Disintegrates. But the moments where you're ending the game is generally around your Fire Breath. Your crowd control Sleepwalk is not like fantastic out of all the crowd controls in the game. The instant route is pretty nice. The ability to kind of like immune stuns with Deep Breath. They recently pruned the wall honor talent. There was some reason they needed to prune it. So you used to be able to craft walls that could line of sight, which definitely was increasing its viability, but that's gone now. You have some decent survivability with Renewing Blaze as like Barkskin Frenzied Regen all baked in together to try and keep yourself alive. I think that it's a lot better than people are expecting, but not like absolutely insane. Do I want to put it on A? It's probably low A. Okay, I want to say like low A at the moment. My expectations for it, especially because something like Fire Breath doing that much damage is like a big weenu, like that's gonna get nerfed. And if it does, how good is this spec, right? So in that situation, I'd say I would give it like a low A at the moment, bordering into B. Maybe Boomkin is better than Destruction, or it's close. It's probably close. Maybe something more like this. Yeah, probably. BM damage is easier to get off than Destruction, ordering a little bit different. Elemental Shaman, this is the same type of deal. You get a lobby for solo queue, and there's all melee DPS. You're probably going 0 and 6. I'm just saying that. I've seen it lots of times with really good Ellies. They get a lobby with a Feral Druid, a DK, and a Demon Hunter. You ain't winning the game. Now, if you get a lobby that's a little bit more diverse than that, you can start getting some work done. So it's the same weaknesses as Shadowlands. Getting trained down by melee DPS, you're not going to have a lot of support from a lot of your teammates in the game just because it's hard to coordinate that type of stuff. But it can still crack some massive damage out. I've been seeing massive Earth Shocks, massive Lightning Bolts, this type of deal. So due to its survivability, I kind of want to pull it down a little bit at the moment. Do note that things could shift, probably somewhere really close to where Evoker is at the moment. So maybe things could shift it around, pull it up a bit, give it a bit of a higher ranking. But I think it's survivability to melee DPS and with how prevalent they're likely to be, because people like to reroll to Fodom, and right now Demon Hunter is like really good, and Fury Warriors are really good, and DKs are really good, and they're honestly specs that are easier to play. So there's probably going to be more people that play them, that it might be tough to make it work. But if you're Insane Ellie, probably make it work. So come in the middle, somewhere in the middle. I think that's fair. Now, Shadow Priest, this spec is great in solo queue. I'm putting this right up next to Demonology, and the main reasons for this is the same thing as Demo. You've got stuns and silences. You can control multiple members in the game in specific windows of time when you're going for your Psyfiend and your Mind games, and you're able to absorb incoming healing, and people are really not coordinated with Psyfiend in solo queue. Like, nobody kills it ever, so you just got 50% healing reduction on a target. Mind Mind Games is redirecting healing into damage, which is really powerful with a lot of like the auto healing mechanics that are in the game at the moment. So you got all the control at the end of the game. You're doing really good scoreboard damage. You got execute power. You've got mechanics that uncoordinated players are going to struggle to deal with. Shadow looks really good. It was really fun. Like, I honestly had so much fun with it. The Mind Flay Insanity talent. Oh, the Devouring Plague damage. Oh, like, oh, but I do think that Demonology is probably slightly better, although it's close, because Shadow can also help its healer a lot more than Demonology. It might be one of the best, maybe the best. And likely a safe pick, because it doesn't have those extraordinary 300,000 hits, and it's not like always invincible type of deal. So maybe it's the one. Maybe it is going to be the best spec ultimately when the expansion launches. Either way, this is my current assessment, current outline, and thoughts with the specializations in the Dragonflight beta moving towards release. If there are any changes, you're going to know them, because I'm releasing them here pretty much whenever they happen, and we'll be updating this list ongoing, talking about it, strengths and weaknesses, competitive viability, tons of information related to Dragonflight. But other than that, thank you very much for watching the video. I hope that you've enjoyed it, got some intel on your decision-making process for your class moving forward in the next expansion, and thank you for watching. I will catch you in the next one.